we all had different timelines and things we were willing to say and how much we're willing to say at different times. I have Melissa Hogan here and Lydia, Craig. We all have our Venn diagrams overlapping with Ramsey Solutions and had big, our lives changed dramatically due to some really negative things that happened with our connection to Ramsey Solutions. And initially, we could not speak about it.
Gotta
Really
back
very
up.
much to each other. Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
You gotta back up to how we met, which is
Okay.
if people don't know that I started a writing group and posted in Lampo Ladies, which is the Ramsey female Facebook group. I didn't know either of you. You both
Yeah.
responded. We started this writing group back in 2016 before anything else. And even back then, there was this tension
Yeah.
of what we could and couldn't or were willing to speak about. Because we talked about writing, we talked about books and what we were reading and writing, all those things. But every once in a while, we would stray into, hey, this feels off for me.
Yeah.
Or are you struggling with this issue? And we would dance around it because of the whole, is this gossip? But
Yeah.
we were trying to reckon with our faith and with what, I know Amy, I remember you speaking up and, things that we could see that weren't really consistent, weren't internally consistent, but weren't consistent with the faith that we believed in.
Yeah.
And I felt I'd never wanted to put anybody else in danger by
Right.
talking about something and putting them at risk
Yeah.
for.
There were some very, very strict rules about talking about the company if you had a concern that wasn't like, if you didn't want to say something that was like, hey, everything's fantastic. You wanted to say something that was something you were questioning or didn't like, you did not talk about it with your friends at all. But what I think is really fascinating is that this timeline overlapped with the rise of Donald Trump. And we talked very openly, the three of us, about our like, what is happening in the world of politics and Christianity and that overlap and how that was impacting our relationships. And we talked very frankly about this. So the fact that we held back in one area was pretty interesting. It's
I
hard
feel
to,
like
yeah,
the narcissism, we talked about Donald Trump and the narcissism. And then I think that helped prime our knowledge and our relating to one another on that issue for everything else that would happen.
yeah, yeah.
That's
This
for
is
sure
like,
true. Yeah, I mean, if we would not have agreed politically, I don't think we could have ever talked about our work experience. Like, we would have known it would not have been safe.
yeah, it
Right.
was a way of testing the waters, even though I don't know that we were like overtly or consciously doing it. But in some
Mhm.
ways, we're like, I know this person is safe in this way. I think we mostly didn't want to put each other in a rough situation. Um,
Yeah. I
like
could feel
particularly
the
Melissa. Oh,
tension.
go ahead, Lydia. I interrupted
Well, I never felt like I couldn't talk. I always thought that was stupid. And but I could feel that other people felt that way, and not just in our friend group and other friend groups in that company. We would have some friends say, okay, this is a safe place. What I'm going to say, you can't tell anyone, like there's just this tension that you couldn't. So I didn't want to make anybody else uncomfortable. But I
Yeah.
never personally felt like I shouldn't talk about what I want. I don't like being told that I can't talk about things. Like to me, it was never gossip. I never understood that.
Yeah. And I think I understood Lydia and Danny don't define this as gossip. And so I can talk to them about concerns. I wanted to protect Melissa. I didn't want to bring things to you, Melissa, because you are more front facing.
Right.
Your ex-husband was like a face of the company, and I wouldn't want you to have to defend things.
But the funny part was you all knew way more about what was happening at that company than I ever did
Yeah.
because I never, I mean, it's hilarious. I didn't really follow the stuff that was happening there. And my husband at the time really kept me insulated,
Mhm.
created this very strong boundary between what I knew and didn't know and who I knew and didn't know there. So you both actually knew more about the everyday goings on, about events that would happen, about their philosophy, way more than I ever did.
Yeah, we'd be like, hey, we're getting our new insurance.
First I heard about it.
And we have a list of where everybody is sitting at the Christmas party and, send it to Melissa. Yeah, so I guess there are two themes there of the like figuring out if we can talk to each other and what we could talk about. And then later that line of when we all individually at different times broke off our relationship. We broke up with Ramsey Solutions. And it didn't happen all at the same time for all of us, but it was great overlap in all of our experiences. In fact, I was at Lydia's house when our canary in the coal mine started singing. Nathan's boss resigned the day I was going over to Lydia's to watch her kids so she could go to a doctor appointment. And both of us were like looking at her like, what does this mean? What is going on? And I'm like, this is the end for us. And Lydia's like, what? Do you remember that, Lydia?
Yes, yeah. That was definitely a point where we realized it was way more than just maybe a misunderstanding or like a personal problem. Like this was a company problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in that situation, I never wanted to tell anyone related to Ramsey what was happening. I mean, first of all, I was conditioned not to tell anyone, much less somebody at Ramsey. And when you're in that environment where you're conditioned not to speak and not, I hardly ever, I mean, you guys know, I mean, I never spoke about my marriage or things that were happening in my family, except for things with Case. And so even that other friend, it was in desperation that I even told her because I was just falling apart.
Yeah.
And I had my therapist and I didn't know what was happening because it was so it's kind of mind-blowing when you're being gaslit in those ways. And so I just felt like I had no choice but to have somebody else and called her and regretted it in a lot of ways because you don't want to put somebody in that position.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about that. What were some of the reasons why as the end was drawing near and even after our breakup with Ramsey that we didn't or couldn't speak? Who wants to take this one first?
I mean, I'll say for me, I mean, one, I was conditioned not to speak.
Yeah.
Two, God wasn't calling me to speak because, when you look at all the reasons that people speak to another person or speak publicly, I was really in a lot of prayer about what to say and to whom or in what circumstances. And, I was, speaking with some of the women in my spiritual life and in my church that were, that I was talking with, but I wasn't wanting to bring anybody else in unless I had to. And I remember I had like a 2-line thing that I told both of you. And this was before I was under the gag order. But before, I think I said to you
that God was providing for you.
Yeah.
And that you were currently separated.
Yeah, I was separated. God was providing for me. And I was, I think I was, hopeful for repentance or something like that. But yeah, so, and then, that led to not long after, that canary in the coal mine, I was under a gag order and couldn't speak. So,
yeah. So first of all, you felt like you shouldn't, and then you couldn't. How about you, Lydia?
Yeah, I think our two main reasons were one, Melissa, she was under a gag order. I didn't want to jeopardize anything that was going on. And I didn't understand everything that was going on. There's kids involved in a marriage and a job. So I just didn't want to jeopardize any of that. And then secondly, it was just our own personal trauma of how we left and how my husband was treated. And when you are, spiritually and emotionally abused, like you leave so confused that you don't even know like what to tell people. You need a lot of time to, work it all out and understand what even happened to you before you feel confident enough to say what happened.
Yeah. I think for us, I mean, we were really, I would say we were lucky. I was lucky that I was at a place where I could talk to Lydia, at least to be like, hey, this is the end for us. It was, like March that we started talking to each other. I think it was standing outside after the funeral for your aunt, Melissa, where we debriefed with each other. Like, this is what's happening right now. We stood out in the parking lot for quite a while connecting, but there are a lot of people in situations like we had that while you are inside still, there's nobody in. The only people who would get it would be inside, and you can't talk to them.
Right.
And so I wanted to follow the rules. I don't want anybody to say we had done something wrong. And so that's one reason why I wasn't saying anything. And also, like what Lydia said, our situation so overlapped with yours, Melissa, and we didn't want to share someone's story that wasn't ours to tell. And the ramifications were just so big. And the story is so long. To get someone to understand it, anytime we'd tell somebody the story, this is a 3-hour conversation.
Right.
I mean, unless you're with no interruptions, it's easily a 3-hour conversation. When someone's like, hey, let's get together and talk about your story, I'd be like, when they're like, let's do it over coffee, I'm like, I think it's going to take a little bit longer.
Dinner, dessert, and breakfast the next morning.
It is it's at least 3 hours just for our part.
Well, I think at the beginning, you don't, it's difficult to talk about something when you don't even really have a framework for
Yeah.
what is happening or what has happened, because you can't explain it. Something is bad. I mean, that was really like, this is bad.
Mhm.
And then what is that? And you also, when you're in a situation like that, whether it's a church or a company or somewhere else, when people are acting in ways that are wholly inconsistent with who you had understood them to be or who they had presented themselves as,
Yeah.
that cognitive dissonance kicks in. And you're like, this doesn't make sense. And you are to yourself, is this real? Do they know? Do they not know? Do they not understand? And so there's this time where you've got to figure out even how to have language. You have to learn and process and hopefully go to therapy and have language around what has happened to you. And also I feel like there's a patience, I feel like, that in my case, God was prompting to allow time to pass where you could see, do people actually know what they're doing? Do
Mm.
they actually know the truth? Are they doing this intentionally? Might they realize something different? Might they repent? And it's, this is what I watched God do over the course of like 2018 to 19, was like something would come out. There would be a call to the truth by me or the situation. And instead, that person, whether it was my then husband or Ramsey Solutions, they would double down on the deception and the bullying and the obfuscation. And you're like, wait a second. And then God would reveal something else. And there would be a prompting to the truth. And then they would double down again. So I feel like you almost need a few patterns of that before you recognize it as a pattern and go, oh, wait, they know
Yeah.
exactly what they're doing.
Yeah. I think another thing is I think maybe Lydia and I knew more than you. Lydia, you can tell me if you resonate with this, was how people view those that speak negatively about the company. We just knew, like, after leaving, that just telling people wasn't going to be easily received. Because partly we already knew what it would cost people to believe it. We knew we didn't have, if people were going to ask for proof, it was really going to be hard to show them like the tangible proof that we didn't really have to offer them, only like our lived experiences of seeing things personally that you don't always, we didn't walk around with a video camera. And there was a lot of different threads. So I think part of being quiet was like this hope that people would be like, oh, the Fritzes are good people and they're gone. We're going to go ask them why they've left. Surely us just leaving will speak loudly and someone will care. How does that land with you, Lydia?
Yeah, I mean, we witnessed Twittergate, so that was the first class to leave, and we knew how people were talked about and treated. And I knew people who would try to communicate to me why they left, and it was like in code, and it was confusing, and it was like, I don't want to do that. Like, we were the new class, right? The new exits, and and I knew it was going to be complicated. And these people leave their homes, they move across country for these jobs. There's a lot at stake. And you don't want to jeopardize anyone's job. And it's also a Christian company where the default is to believe in the goodness,
The
right?
leaders,
And
right?
yeah, that they're trying to do the right thing, that this is just a miscommunication, or, you know, it's just one bad apple. And it's hard to explain to people who don't necessarily understand or believe in systemic issues that, you know, this is a bigger problem. It's really
Yeah.
hard to explain that. You just end up sounding crazy.
Yeah.
And you touch on a important point too. I mean, there are legitimate concerns about finances and about, livelihood and children and income. And, you have to weigh, even when you're ready to speak out, weighing that against, the necessity for the truth in a given circumstance. I mean, some people could say, oh, well, that was really dumb for me to go to Ramsey Solutions and say, you need to realize what's happened here, barring the fact that I was expecting it to go public. And it was actually out of respect for them. But some people would say, well, you're risking everything. But the reality was, I was very confident that God was going to care for us. We go to every verse about the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. I was confident that in telling the truth, in a way that tried to care for people and respect people needing and deserving to know the truth, that God would care for us. Now, it doesn't mean if somebody doesn't say something that they're not trusting the Lord. But I think, depending on the circumstances, you're weighing these very real financial concerns versus what God is prompting you to do. And that might be different in different circumstances. But for me, there were, that was an instance where I felt very much the prompting to speak this and tell the truth, but that I wasn't necessarily prompted to go tell the world at that time or tell other people that didn't, that God hadn't necessarily prompted me to tell.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think we all know people that know the truth and have decided to be more publicly silent. I mean, they may have conversations privately with people, but they have decided that their role or how they process this is different. So what are reasons why that we have seen, and I know you've touched on that a little bit, Melissa, but we all have friends that have made different decisions, and we respect greatly their position of why they're like, yeah, I know it's a dumpster fire. I can't have my name attached really vocally in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, God leads each of us differently. And I have no ill will towards people that aren't speaking up about their own experience or aren't speaking up in somehow support that they believe that I've told the truth, or people that stay there and are like, yeah, I know this is, I'm bringing a paycheck home for my kids and I don't subscribe to any of this stuff. I'm not here to, God will call each of us in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I understand that everybody has a different personality and not everybody wants to be, out there in the public, and everybody has a different story. Some stories are more personal and they wouldn't want to share those details. And some people are still trying to maintain friendships within the company. And I can tell you, as soon as you speak up, those are gone. It's just too awkward. So there's just a lot of things that you have to juggle and decide, like, is it worth it? Is it gonna make a difference? What am I gonna lose? You always lose something when you speak up.
Yeah. And what role do you feel like is the role that is the comfortable one, that you kind of see the trajectory of your life and the gifts that you've been given? And some of us, that role is just paying attention and documenting things because it's going to come in handy at some point. Some people are going to be in a position where they are going to be able to influence people on the inside more. And so maintaining those relationships and leaving a really hospitable, open door makes a huge difference. And then there are certain people that, yeah, like you said, if what happened to you is really personal, and sometimes with abusive environments can involve in really personal, embarrassing things that you just don't want to have out there because you feel shame about the situation. Maybe you need like therapy for a while before you go there, because your well-being is equally important to whistleblowing. And I don't think any of us believe that God's like, well, I know this is going to be really hard for your well-being, Lydia, but you are the one and only voice that can be the savior in this situation.
Right.
Yeah.
And also just like work stability. A lot of people leave without a job. Like, you don't want to immediately be a whistleblower and seem like you're a disgruntled employee. Like, you want to have some sort of security in your next place of employment before any of that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest reason people aren't speaking is an NDA, right?
Right. Yeah,
And
so.
and there are lots of reasons why people might sign one too, even if they were like totally against one. And a good reason is to provide for your family.
Right.
You need
And,
groceries.
we recognize that the experience that each of us have been through and in our families has been traumatic in a lot of different ways. And speaking out carries its own trauma. Like,
Yeah.
even if you've processed and you've, have a framework for what happened to you, there's a risk. I mean, the likelihood is that once you speak out, there's a risk you won't be believed by anyone or by the people you want to be believed by, people who were your friends. People in the positions that you're generally whistleblowing about, whether it's abusive people or, wolves, and they're generally very charismatic and they're well connected. And almost assuredly, if they have any idea that you are going to counter their deceptive narrative, they have engaged in a smear campaign ahead of time. I know that happened to me. I mean, it's obviously very documented in the emails that Ramsey has put out, that there was a whole, picture drawn of me that was, very negative, and it had been going on for some time. So, you risk people not believing you. You risk people impugning your motives, saying you're lying, or, in my circumstance, people said, oh, I was trying to get him fired. I was angry and jealous, and, all of these different things, versus what I've seen consistently from whistleblowers, and what I know is true about me, acting in ways that your goal is to protect people, whether it's protect your children, protect, other people in your family, stand up for yourself. Your goal is to warn other people so this doesn't happen to them. But even independent of that, you have a right to tell your own story and tell what happened to you. It's not defamation to speak the truth.
Yeah.
And we all have a right to do that.
Yeah. I think we ended up being like being boxed in gave us an opportunity to be creative in what we could do and how we could speak. And while, like Melissa, it was very wrong for you to have the legal system used against you to legally gag you, like be unable to speak. Once we're in that position, and none of us want to jeopardize your gag order either. And even the way we talk to each other had to be really careful so that you did not violate your gag order. You had to be like, is this in helping me prepare for my case, which I can talk about my case or not? In that case, you can't speak specifically on things. And we had to talk in different ways. So I guess
generally about,
yeah. So like how did we handle what did we do in the absence of being able to like just shout it from the rooftops? What did we do instead? And we all had different things that we sort of did as we kind of wanted it all out there. Like we were like, why doesn't everybody, like if everyone just knew this, it would change everything. Instead, I know one thing I did, I made a list of all the people that I wish knew the truth and that I wanted rescued. My rescue list. I walked around and prayed for that list. And I read a lot. I read a lot of things to make sense.
Yeah, we read a lot. We listened to a lot of podcasts. I posted a lot of quotes on Facebook without specifically naming the company. Anything that, people could read between the lines and maybe get an idea of what was happening and maybe have some insight for themselves. But yeah, it was just a lot of reading and listening and figuring it out.
Yeah.
I created a whole file on my phone called untweetables, where I would type the tweet out and then I would copy and paste it into the untweetables file because, sometimes just saying the thing, or how they say write the letter and don't send it, that kind of stuff. I joke that the untweetables file is a book draft, and it very well may be at one point. But, you just want to say those things. I think, we talked about, what systemic narcissism looks like and abuse and emotional manipulation and talked about hypotheticals. Lawyers are really good about hypotheticals. Hypothetically, if a person were in this circumstance, here's what they might do. And, but, and then, getting you guys to help me. It's crazy how God creates these circumstances where you go, oh, I have no other option or no good option other than to do this. And in my divorce, it was requested my entire social media files and messages and posts for years.
Yeah.
Problem is I have been running a nonprofit that involved people's healthcare. And so there was tons of private health information in there that needed to be redacted by hand. And my gag order allowed people to help with my case. And so how many pages would you say? There was probably 20,000.
I can still smell in my dreams Sharpie. We have Sharpie marks on our kitchen table, which brings me joy now. How many reams of paper did you print out? Like we just kept picking up more stacks.
Because in theory, electronic discovery says, oh, you should, do it electronically, but I could not give, just hundreds of people's private health information, out there in that way. So there were stacks, the stacks were this high and there were probably 20 of them at least.
There was a lot. Your kitchen was full of them.
Oh, it was crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We marshaled our children to help.
Yeah.
They're pretty good at it.
She was redacting at age 9.
One of her earliest memories will be redacting. That will be a good thing to unpack.
I had nothing to hide in that way, but it's like, what do you do? So I didn't want to say, oh, I want a protective order or I want, to deny this because I had nothing to hide other than other people's health information.
Right. Yeah. And you wanted to show that you aren't trying to like hide behind something. I think it also it helped us lean into our safe people with each other. We just processed a lot together. And then we started thinking, we helped fill in blanks for each other that we had not been able to fill in before. Because we're all sort of on our little parallel lines. And every once in a while, they would move to intersect in different areas at the company. But really, each business unit is its own experience and might as well be its own company. And I had figured that out before Nathan left, was that I could not say that because Nathan had a great boss and a great team that everyone did.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And not everybody had that. Like, he had the same boss for almost the entire time that he was there. That's not normal. But that was in that they had a really special team, super, super solid, steady. They just did software development, and not all the software development teams were like this, but theirs was really good. But like to like now we're comparing notes, and Lydia's experience with Danny's work was not steady. Had a lot of movement here
The
and there.
first department was amazing, and then they shut it down. And then yes, it was just downhill from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's another thing is it because each department is so different, it's hard to talk to people because you don't know what their experience has been.
Yeah. So I think instead of, this just came to me, instead of like going and talking to new people, what we did is we went back.
Mm-hmm.
We went back to people that had left, that we had been afraid to ask the question to, or had left the little breadcrumbs that we hadn't really wanted to follow. And we're like, all right, I thought you were the bad guy. And now I realize I was.
Mm-hmm.
What did I miss? Tell me. I know we had some of those 3-hour conversations with people
Yeah,
that we had
that was
not
actually
had.
my favorite part was it's like a reunion outside of the company with all these people, and like suddenly you all speak the same language and you experience really similar threads.
Well, and that's the way sometimes to put it together is to see the patterns,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like when it's just happening to you. So I know some of the things that happened in my marriage, when it's happening to you and you're being told it's you and you're being gaslit in that way, you're like, well, is it me? And you try to fix something, and then it's still you and you try to fix something. But same thing in the company, like until I talk to other women and realize, oh, we have a very similar experience, and this stuff all happens in the same ways for a lot of women, until going to these other people, go, oh, that sounds familiar, that here's how that played out in my situation. And so like the more people you talk to, the more you're like, oh, there's a pattern in this, there's a pattern how this plays out. Here's how people are moved out when they don't want them there, or shut down, and you just start to see these patterns, and now it all makes sense.
Yeah. And you realize people that you were still in contact with had stories that they had never told you,
or that they didn't even realize. That's the other thing too, is like,
oh, I thought you just resigned from your job. I had no idea.
But like speaking out, it's like a magnet in some sense, that people go, oh, they're like attracted, and they sometimes don't even realize what has happened, and then you put it together and you're like, oh. So that's another good purpose for speaking out.
Yeah. We also just gathered information, and that was sort of fun. I mean, it felt like we can't really do anything right now, but we could document our experience.
Detective Amy. The Amy got the moniker Detective Amy.
But no, there was like a Nancy Drew in all of us, right? I think we said connections, that we all have different connections with people that have a little bit of like a Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew in them. And once they saw the truth, we're like, I can't really put my name out there, but I have some information and access to things that I have like kept note of throughout the years. And I don't know why I had them, or why I was paying attention, or why I hit record at this time. And they trusted us with some of that. And we we just individually had conversations and made note of things and screenshotted things and books. And there's just so many public things out there with a public company and public figures. I made a big spreadsheet at one point with Lydia of like a timeline of a bunch of things that had happened that included like video from the Ramsey show.
But
And
that's what they say. That's part of that sense making you talk about. You have, I mean, I had to, in my marriage, I went back 25 years. I met my husband, 25 years ago, or more than that now. And I had to do, okay, here's what I thought was happening, like all along this timeline of 25 years. And then go plug back in, actually, here are these significant events that were actually happening along that timeline. And then also with like Ramsey solution, that's part of that, getting your brain wrapped around what, has been happening. And it helps, but it's kind of crazy that you have to do that.
yeah.
Mhm.
But
I was
I was watching Enola Holmes 2 the other day, and there was this line that is so similar to what I've said. You pull the thread. Your job is to pull the thread. And I think we pulled so many threads where we're like, I don't know, specifically how this is significant or, where this goes, but you start pulling that thread and it leads you somewhere most of the time.
Hey,
our
speaking
Nancy
of
Drews.
superheroes, so
Oh yes, your
this is
little
what it's like to be in a high control group, right? It's Thanos in a Christmas sweater. You're like, oh, we're gonna have fun. We're gonna party. He looks friendly. And then like you look closer and he's got the Infinity Stones. It's like he could snap his fingers at any moment. Like that's like the tension, right? Of like being in these high control
yeah,
relationships.
yeah. I think there are people out there that are like, man, I wish we had somebody that cared enough or a story that was big enough or public enough, public facing enough or impacting enough that somebody could run a story for us. Wouldn't that be healing? But we found a lot of healing without a public story. I mean, there was some
Lots of healing over
vindication,
coffee.
but by doing this other sense making, I would say was probably more I don't know. I mean, there's some like tension and anxiety that comes with like a public story because you have high expectations that something will happen. Like, what is this going to make possible? But you just are surprised all the time when you're doing this private, like connecting with people and rebuilding relationships and filling in the blanks. That is honestly probably 75-80% of the healing, maybe 90.
And I think it's hard to have high expectations for what you have to really just expect that the benefit of telling the story is the healing you can get and hopefully make sense for somebody else. Beyond that, I mean, for example, look at Nexium. It was called a cult and things, were coming out about it, gosh, at least 10 years or more, 10, 15 years before a lot of the really, shocking stuff came out and, Keith Raniere was, put on trial. And so that's how long something can play out. And, you hope it doesn't keep harming people along the way, but sometimes it does. And if you've spoken, I mean, that's really all you can do is put the truth out there where people can find it. Now, I will say, like for me, I've struggled with shame in not seeing it sooner, not seeing things in my marriage sooner, not seeing things with Ramsey sooner. And like, when I was being, when they were attempting to control me and manipulate me and bully me, like why, there were points where I didn't say, this is wrong and here's how it's wrong, but you only know when you know. And, just giving yourself some grace, because that's hard to go, oh, I wish I would have done this differently.
Yeah.
That is the hard thing because I think anyone with a similar story, like, what is the one thing you do differently? Like, all of us want to go back and leave better, and not leave on good terms, like maybe we did, you know, but instead, like, have the confidence to say what really happened, and to leave feeling empowered instead of feeling confused and like a victim. But you don't, I mean, that's not realistic. But I think that everybody has that. Like, I wish I could have said
Yeah.
what I wish I could have said the truth and stood up for myself in the moment. So speaking out is sort of like getting a chance to do that. And that part of it can be healing.
I will say, I did say two things directly to Dave Ramsey that were not okay. One of which is he'd said, well, here's what we're going to tell some of the team. And it was untruthful. And, I sat there and prayed and looked at him right in the face. And I said, the narrative that you're talking about here, I think it's deceptive. I don't think it's truthful. And, I sit here and go, what was I thinking? Like,
Wow.
that was like totally the Holy Spirit, because I don't know how I had. So I do have to remind myself, like, there are points that we speak up and that we say things that are the truth, even if it's not the whole thing we wish we could have said, and we write the whole speech that, we wish we could have said, walking out the door.
Yeah.
You, we were only so strong, and to speak up at all was dangerous. And so I do want to give us credit for whatever we said or did while we were inside.